If you've ever ironically said, "That's going in my montage," or "I'm joining faze" after doing something cool in a video game, you're probably familiar with what a quickscope is. If you don't even know what I'm talking about, buckle up, because what might seem like a simple tactic in a video game has a very long, detailed history that I guarantee even some of the dankest internet users aren't aware of. In this video, I want to define what a quickscope is, determine its earliest origin, and then we'll see how far this art of quickly sniping your opponent has gone to this day, and why some people still hate on it. If you enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and let's get into it. So let's start at square one. What is a quickscope? Funny enough, even this isn't 100% clear, but the general idea is to shoot your sniper rifle immediately after scoping in. The reason you would do this is because in most games, if you fire a sniper rifle without scoping in, your bullet is inaccurate and goes in a random direction, usually indicated by a hipfire crosshair located in the center of your screen. If you are scoped in, your shot usually goes perfectly straight. In games like Counter-Strike, you can scope in immediately with a small bit of inaccuracy, but in games like COD, there's a small delay before you scope in for a fully accurate shot. With quickscoping, this allows the player to fire off a quick, accurate shot in games like Call of Duty, whereas a player in Counter-Strike may consider staying scoped in for longer for a more accurate shot. Now, the reason the definition of a quickscope can get a bit murky is usually because of how long the player stays in their scope. If you scope in, see your opponent, and then flick to them, that might actually be considered something called a drag scope. Although it is still rather quick, you aren't immediately shooting like a traditional quickscope. For this reason, you will sometimes hear a player refer to a true quickscope as a black scope. This is just a way of differentiating between something like a drag scope, where you see little to no actual scope. But who was the first person to ever do one, and when was the term first coined? Let's start at the very beginning. Now, the first ever game to include a sniper rifle was most likely a 1988 game called Hostages, where the player is in charge of a hostage rescue mission, and you can take on the role of a sniper. But obviously, no one made any quickscoping montages back in 1988, as the game played in a 2D space, and the game also wasn't multiplayer, obviously. The first game to include a sniper rifle in a 3D space that was also multiplayer was most likely an old Quake mod called Team Fortress, which released in August of 1996. On a separate note, this mod would ultimately turn into Team Fortress 2 that many people know of today. But within that mod, players were able to use a sniper rifle in a 3D space that could one-tap their opponents for perhaps the first time ever in gaming. Unfortunately, the player was not actually able to scope in with the sniper, and from what I can tell, it was also perfectly accurate hip firing, kind of like Halo, which we will get into later. So the first game to include a 3D sniper scope with an actual zoom feature was most likely a very much forgotten about game released March 31st, 1997 called Outlaws. Now, Outlaws was not multiplayer, but it did have an actual scope that acted in a 3D environment. So technically, the first game that it was ever possible to quickscope in was Outlaws. But obviously, no one cares about quickscoping random NPCs in an old Wild West sim. What was the first game where it's possible to quickscope noobs online in PvP? I know a lot of people aren't going to expect this answer. Most people think it's COD, Counter-Strike, Halo, something like that. But most likely, it was a game called Delta Force, releasing October 21st, 1998. Delta Force featured a sniper rifle with a 3D scope in a 3D space, and most importantly, it had online capabilities. Unfortunately, at the time, unless you were playing on LAN, there wasn't much multiplayer action going on. From what I read, the game had a terrible connection, making it very difficult to actually play online. So it may have been possible to quickscope other players, but it's very, very unlikely that Delta Force was the first time that it ever happened. There was also a game called Star Siege Tribes that released the same year, which was an online game with a sniper that you could quickscope. But from what I read, this game too struggled to play online. But don't worry, we still haven't even made it into the 2000s yet. Once again, in 1998, a little game called Half-Life would release and unknowingly give birth to a mod commonly known today as Counter-Strike. The original Half-Life mod would come out mid-1999, then fully releasing as a standalone game, Counter-Strike, on November 9th, 2000. The game would feature a very powerful rifle called the Op, or AWP, and anyone who knows anything about Counter-Strike knows that the Op, to this day, is seen as one of the most iconic weapons in all of gaming, even through all the different versions of it we've seen. And yes, you can quickscope with it. After all the research that I've done on this topic, in my humble opinion, the first ever online quickscope was most likely done on the original Counter-Strike. Online play on PCs was becoming more commonplace and easy to set up, so there were a lot more gunfights with sniper rifles happening at the time. The first person to ever do one most likely didn't even realize what they were doing or how much importance that tactic of quickly scoping in and shooting your opponent would actually be. See, the way that Counter-Strike is set up, just by naturally playing the game and using a sniper, without even knowing what a quickscope is, you might accidentally do it in a pinch, just despite the fact the action itself didn't most likely have a name at the time. But even though a lot of people were playing Team Deathmatch in the early days of Counter-Strike, the game was a lot more competitive at its core. No one really could have seen quickscoping as anything more than a tactic to occasionally do because you need to, or sometimes to show off. It was most likely never adopted wholeheartedly as an actual playstyle, nor is it likely where the term quickscope was coined. During the early 2000s, we would see the rise of many more online games featuring a quickscopable sniper. Halo, Battlefield, Call of Duty, SOCOM, all of these games would be released between 2001 and 2003. But the main difference between these games and Counter-Strike was that these games were a lot more casual. Rather than being a very competitive PC game where your life mattered more, games like Call of Duty would let you respawn immediately after dying, throwing you right back into the action. And most importantly, they were made for consoles. This era of gaming between 2001 and about 2003 is most likely the birthplace of quickscoping. Xbox and PlayStation went online in 2002 for the first time, so console gamers could finally express their dominance over the internet.
I am now loading Acclaim's Revolt.
And dealing with the controls on the original Xbox and PlayStation over PC, this is most likely when people realized you could quickscope relatively easily when using aim assist. Aim assist is a feature that holds a player's hand through a gunfight by giving them some assistance when aiming. It's a rather controversial topic nowadays, but back then, let's be honest, it was a bit necessary on console. Now, because this was over 20 years ago, unfortunately, it's very hard to find any footage of anyone quickscoping back then. YouTube wouldn't release until February 14th, 2005, which was the first website of its kind. There may be a clip of someone quickscoping back in the early 2000s, only it has all but disappeared from the internet by now. If there is any recording of something like this, it lies in an old forum somewhere. Even some of the most iconic montages released later, like Thunderstruck, aren't available anymore due to copyright. By the way, we'll get into all those other games like COD 2 in a second. A lot of people think quickscoping started with COD 2, but it actually didn't. So what we're looking for is the word quickscope. Who was the first person to say it? It turns out the answer to this question isn't quite so simple. After the release of YouTube, we start to see videos of quickscoping pop up quite frequently in the year 2006. But the origin of the word quickscope might actually surprise you. The earliest example I can find of anyone naming this tactic, believe it or not, is in the comment section of a SOCOM 2 video, and they weren't calling it quickscoping either. The very first name this tactic had was most likely quicksniping. After its release on November 4th, 2003, SOCOM 2 would start seeing people use quicksniping as a playstyle rather than a simple tactic to use occasionally. I found comments from 2005 and 2006 of people actually flaming others for not using this playstyle, and you were considered a noob if you sniped the normal way. Even though the first Call of Duty released a week before SOCOM 2, it is more likely that the actual playstyle of quickscoping, or quicksniping, originated from SOCOM 2, or at least that's where the term was most likely first coined. I had no idea that the game that I was 1v1ing my brother in back in 2004 on our PlayStation 2 would ultimately become the birthplace of one of the internet's most iconic gaming trends. Although COD players adopted this playstyle way more heavily than any other franchise, SOCOM 2 was most likely patient zero. After Call of Duty 2 and the Xbox 360 were both released on November 22nd, 2005, we see the first video with quicksnipe in the title emerge on an old COD 2 montage dated March 1st, 2006. The oldest video with quickscope in the title, however, was released 2 weeks later on March 15th. Surprisingly, this video is from Halo, which is funny because quickscoping is mostly pointless in Halo. The sniper rifle from the Halo franchise is perfectly accurate hip firing. You only ever scope in so you can see your opponent better at a distance. The actual act of quickscoping in Halo has no benefit except for showing off. Because these terms were barely used at the time, it's hard to dictate exactly when it switched from quicksnipe to quickscope, but it was most likely sometime in 2006 on Call of Duty, Halo, or Counter-Strike. For example, we start to see Counter-Strike videos like this one from the same year also use quickscope in the title, rather than quicksnipe. Now, montages have been a thing on the internet for a very long time, but quickscoping montages saw a very sudden and large explosion in 2006. After the release of COD 2 and YouTube, both the platform and playstyle would grow up together side by side. Also around this time, we would start to see the emergence of quickscoping teams, for example, Optic Gaming. To this day, Optic is one of the biggest gaming organizations, but it all started from a few friends having fun quickscoping back in 2005-2006. Because there wasn't a whole lot of content being uploaded to YouTube at this time, a large portion of the platform was actually montages. The following year, we would see the word quickscope pop up in Urban Dictionary and an article on how to quickscope also posted on WikiHow. This really goes to show that by this time, quickscoping had cemented itself in the internet's lexicon of gaming terms, and was becoming much more of a popular playstyle. Unfortunately, because no one really made money from YouTube at the time, a lot of these montages contain copyrighted music, so I won't be able to play the audio for you. I can really only show single clips or bits of commentary, so if you'd like to check out some of these montages I'll be referencing, there are going to be a bunch of really cool links in the description of the video that I recommend taking a look at. What really set off the montage scene at the time was what most people think about when they think of the origins of quickscoping.
50,000 people used to live here. Now it's a ghost town.
On November 5th, 2007, Call of Duty released probably its most iconic and innovative title ever, Modern Warfare. This game was truly groundbreaking for its time, and is most likely responsible for the way a lot of modern FPS games play to this day. Quickscoping was also part of this game, so naturally we started to see a massive surge of quickscoping montages. Earlier in the video, I mentioned a montage by COD player zzirGrizz. At the time, zzirGrizz, or Grizz, was amongst many people that were uploading montages, but soon he would become the top montage maker for Call of Duty for several years. Grizz is often to this day considered to be the godfather of quickscoping. He definitely did not start quickscoping, but he was largely responsible for the popularity of montages surrounding COD 4 Modern Warfare. Many of the most legendary snipers from that era were inspired to start creating their own montages because of the ones that he was releasing at the time. Sadly, it's impossible to find any of these montages from like 2005 to 2007, besides re-uploads, as he wouldn't make his YouTube channel until 2008. As to where these montages were supposedly uploaded, I don't know. Grizz, if you're somehow watching this video, I'd love to maybe interview you someday as a potential follow-up to this video, so we can all learn more about the sniping scene during this time. Regardless, some of these early montages would go on to get hundreds of thousands or even millions of views, which was almost unheard of on YouTube at the time. The scene would mostly stay the same with the release of Call of Duty World at War on November 11th, 2008, with most quickscopers actually going back to Modern Warfare. Not really much would change until 2009. On November 10th, 2009, the entire gaming landscape would be flipped on its head. My personal all-time favorite COD would release, Modern Warfare 2, and boy was the quickscoping good. In a way, this game felt like it was made for quickscoping. Snipers like the Intervention and Barrett 50 cal had insane scope speeds, especially with the introduction of a perk, Sleight of Hand. With Sleight of Hand Pro, you could scope in faster than any other previous Call of Duty. Before Modern Warfare 2, quickscoping was seen as the hardest and coolest way to snipe, but after Modern Warfare 2, it started receiving a lot more hate. Quickscoping was just as popular as any other playstyle now, and from the outside, it looked like an easy, cheesy tactic, when in reality, it was actually still really hard to do. That is, relative to other playstyles and weapons. Pretty much all the weapons in Modern Warfare 2 were overpowered, but because of the flashy nature of quickscoping, it got a lot more hate. As someone who was involved in the sniping scene for many years, I can confidently say it was way easier to use any other weapon than it is to quickscope. I played some competitive Call of Duty as well, and I can assure you that no one who was sniping on the pro level was quickscoping unless they absolutely had to. Around this time, we would see more gaming organizations pop up as well, most notably FaZe. I don't know, you may have heard of them. On May 31st, 2010, FaZe started out just like any other gaming organization, just a group of friends having some fun, but would ultimately become something much, much bigger.
Hey, what's up guys? This is zzirGrizz, and good morning, I guess. I'm calling it morning.
In 2010, we would start seeing people like Grizz and many others also start to upload things like commentary videos and tutorials, not just montages. For many years, gaming content had mostly stayed the same, but now people were starting to want more from their favorite creators than just clips. This might be a pretty big reach, but I think a lot of these early commentary videos were largely responsible for the development of gaming content as we know it today. Things weren't just about skill anymore. People wanted to be entertained in other ways than just a new montage. On November 9th, 2010, Call of Duty released the first installment of the Black Ops franchise, Call of Duty Black Ops 1. But something about the sniping in this game was off.
They tried to eliminate quickscoping by, when you scope in, your crosshairs won't be in the center, it'll be offset a little bit. Even if you drag your crosshairs over them fast enough, your bullet will still not go straight for like 2 seconds.
That's right, for the first time in COD history, the developers designed snipers in a way with the intention of making quickscoping impossible, or at the very least, much more difficult to do. A lot of people at the time thought that quickscoping was over in Call of Duty, and that snipers would remain nerfed in the future Call of Duties as well. For the first time, a line had been drawn between regular players and those who enjoyed quickscoping and making montages. They would later tone down the nerf on snipers, giving them less sway when aiming in, but culturally, a shift had already occurred. Although lots of people would revert back to Modern Warfare 2, a few snipers would stay with Black Ops 1 and would make a name for themselves, like Sprat. Rather than backing down, Sprat and others like him would take it as a challenge, making their clips that much more entertaining because people knew how hard it was to quickscope in Black Ops 1. Not only that, but the montages themselves would become a lot more professional. This is when we started to see people talk about standards with clips, and a lot more people began focusing on the kill feed. 1 year later, on November 8th, 2011, we would see the release of Modern Warfare 3. Unlike Black Ops 1, quickscoping was back in full swing again. No more crazy sway when you aimed in, clips were relatively easy to hit again. And because people had gotten so much better at sniping now, every montage that came out during this period was out of this world. These couple years after Modern Warfare 3 were really the golden age of montages, where every clip was incredible, all of the editing was smooth and professional. We saw many theme montages with cinematics and stories behind them. The quality of montages had become undeniable at this point, and many snipers were etching themselves into Call of Duty history. The last COD that would release during this golden age, in my opinion, was Black Ops 2. This is where I think things really started to change. As I mentioned just a minute ago, this period in Call of Duty was also quite revolutionary when it comes to the type of content people were making. We saw many more YouTubers starting to do commentary style videos, let's plays, that sort of thing, and a lot of snipers followed suit too.
Pamaj, or faze pamaj, whatever you call me.
By this time, FaZe was known for having the best snipers in the business. Pretty much, if you were the best, you either joined FaZe or maybe Optic. But because content was changing so much at the time, FaZe made a pretty unusual and at the time, controversial decision. On March 14th, 2014, FaZe would go on to recruit a sniper named Jev.
Alright, what's going on, guys? It's Jev, or FaZe Jev. Yeah, FaZe Jev.
Now, Jev was pretty well known at the time. Me and a lot of other people started watching his videos a few months before he joined FaZe, but people weren't really watching him because of his skill. He was just simply more entertaining.
Nope! If I get turned, I can't believe it!
Now, don't get me wrong, Jev was still very good at sniping, but his clips weren't anywhere near the standards of the best players in the world. A lot of really hardcore quickscoping fans saw his recruitment as FaZe selling out or something, but this one decision was really just a giant indicator for the direction the content was heading at the time. That same year, on November 3rd, we saw the release of the first ever jetpack Call of Duty, Advanced Warfare. Sniping itself was still mostly the same in this game, but the movement in Advanced Warfare was just way too fast. When players are constantly flying around at these insane rates of speed, it becomes much harder to hit your shot with a sniper. Some people would stick around, but it was mostly impossible to keep up with where the standards were for clips at the time. Most snipers didn't really even touch Advanced Warfare at all, unlike Black Ops 1 where some people stuck around for the challenge. There were some montages made on the game, but most people just went back to Black Ops 2, Modern Warfare 2, or Modern Warfare 3. This is really where quickscoping first started its downward trend in popularity. After a couple more lackluster jetpack Call of Duties, a lot of the community would become split up now. You had some snipers playing older Call of Duties, some playing the new one, and some who actually stopped making sniping content altogether. A lot of people started making vlogs, IRL content, let's plays, commentaries. The environment around sniping had really changed by the mid-2010s. Montages had pretty much reached their peak, and viewers simply just wanted new content. When it comes to the history of quickscoping, this is where things really start to get stale. There wasn't a whole lot of innovation happening within the genre anymore. Now, I don't think we will ever see the very last quickscope. As long as snipers are in video games and they have scopes on them, people are going to quickscope, but quickscoping is nowhere near what it used to be. For me personally, around the release of Modern Warfare 2019, I began to realize the playstyle was becoming outdated. Every montage was getting less and less views. COD had just gone through an identity crisis with the jetpacks, and now they're moving towards Battle Royale content, and quickscoping was no longer mainstream anymore. There are still a lot of people making montages to this day, and a lot of snipers who stream regularly to a decent sized audience. I don't think quickscoping will ever completely die. It might not be what it was back in 2012, but people will never look at sniper rifles the same way again. And that's pretty much all I wanted to cover in this video. I had no idea when I started researching this topic what I was getting myself into. There was so much that happened in the early 2000s that I simply was not aware of. I appreciate anyone who was able to make it this far. I'll see you guys soon with another video.